we are live. I do my normal, I have to go check on YouTube to make sure that we are live.
Please
So
do.
stand by. The refresh, and we are live.
We're live.
So aloha, everyone. Welcome to the monthly Sanity virtual meetup. My name is Cap. I do developer relations at Sanity. My co-host.
My name is Martin. I'm also with the DevRel team at Sanity. And I'm checking in from Oslo, Norway.
And I'm joining from Vegas, Las Vegas in the US. I don't know if I should like complete like Las Vegas in the US, because I think there's only
Are there
one.
any other Las Vegases?
I don't know. I think there might be one in Arizona, but I don't know.
All right.
Anyway, but yeah,
So
it's
please
rainy
do
today.
let us know where you are checking in from.
Yeah, let us know where you're checking in from. And if it's autumn for you, if the leaves are changing, they don't change in Vegas, or do they change in Norway?
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah.
It's,
Already?
It's getting darker and grayer every day.
Right on. Not here. So it looks like we have people joining in from foggy SF, California. Nice, Runa. Minnesota, awesome. Colorado. I love Colorado. Portugal. Nice.
Hey. As people are joining in the Meetup channel in our community Slack, I do want to draw your attention to the community code of conduct, which you can find bookmarked at the top of the Meetup channel. We are at Sandy very proud of the welcoming and inclusive community, and we do want to keep it that way. So this is super important to us. Please give it a read and welcome.
Yeah. And if you notice, the chat is disabled in YouTube. You'll see down in the description, I put instructions on where the chat can be found. And then I have a banner up right here, but it's in our Slack community in the #meetup channel. This allows us to do emojis and GIFs and threads, and I feel like it's more fun.
Yeah, I'm big on the emojis.
Yeah. So we're over in the Slack community. Definitely come join us. Come say hi. But let's cover the agenda real quick. So first, we are going to have Jonas, the founder and CTO of Kickstart DS. Jonas will speak on seamless integration that they have done with Next and V3. So V3 is the newest version that is coming out for the studio. And I'll talk a little bit more on that. But after Jonas, we have Jono, who is from Roboto Studios and will be speaking on tech jargon, insanity. Sometimes when you're talking to someone who doesn't understand tech jargon, it can get confusing, maybe frustrating. So Jono will talk to us about words that they use with clients to make it not so hard. And then we will hear from our principal engineer, Magnus Holm, who will speak on Grok-1. Grok, so it's like a reintroduction of our query language Grok, if you've used Grok before. I hope you like it. I like it.
I love it.
Yeah, Grok is awesome. But we have like a reintroduction of it, Grok-1. So Magnus will be doing that and showing all the new like functions that come with it. Pretty much you can use Grok as a calculator now, which is pretty cool. Yeah. And then finally, we will have Daniel, a solutions engineer at Sanity, who will be doing a V3 demo. So we have two V3 things happening today. And if you're not familiar with V3, the studio is getting a huge upgrade. And right now it's in developer preview, so you can use it right now. Jonas is one of the examples of how it's being used right now. But there's going to be a full launch, and that will happen later. But in the meantime, we are doing demos on them. And yeah.
I jumped the gun a bit, but there's a useful link in the chat now for anyone who is curious about the V3
Perfect. Right on. Yeah. So if you want to read more about it, it's a great blog post. And then lastly, if you're currently using Sanity and you have a studio and you upgrade it, there is a new findability global search for your content. So run the command Sanity upgrade and then do the shortcut Command K or Control K, and you will have a new updated, new and improved search bar for all your content in your content lake. So that's it from me with agenda and new things.
Yeah, no, I actually love that new update. It makes the search bars so much more just usable.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that we did a webinar with Vercel and Morning Brew. Our very own Carolina Gonzalez joined up with Drew. I'm gonna try and say his name, Bredwick from Vercel. And they explore how Morning Brew transformed their newsletter into a media brand. And you can watch this on Vercel's YouTube channel because they were kind enough to record it for posterity. And do we have a link for them as well?
Yep.
There
I just put it in the chat.
All right. Back to the agenda for today. At the end of every talk, there will be a Q&A session. We'll take 2 to 3 questions from the chat. We will be watching the chat as the presentations go on, so please post all your questions there. If there are additional questions, you can reach out to our presenters through Twitter or here in the community Slack. Mm-hmm. And our internal speakers also can be found in the community Slack.
Yeah. And then we will have a meetup next month. So keep an eye if you're already an event. A Sanity member on Meetup, then you will get the announcement. But just so you know, we do have this monthly. All right, so let's get to our first speaker. So we have Jonas. I'm going to bring Jonas on stage. I'm going to get rid of this banner. Remember, you can find the chat at slack.sanity.io in the Meetup channel. All right, let's bring Jonas on stage. Hi, Jonas.
Hey. How are you doing?
Jonas.
Good. How are you?
Very good.
So where are you joining us from?
Normally, I would be joining from Bonn in Germany, in the Cologne area, but currently I'm on vacation, so I'm joining from Helsinki in Finland.
Oh, nice. You're in the Nordics. That's nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, and as you've said, the leaves are changing rapidly. It's really colorful and nice to look at.
Oh, I'm so envious. Right on. Well, so you are doing a talk on embedding the studio into a Next app. We're all very excited for this. This is our first community V3 talk at one of our meetups. Usually it's an internal person that's doing this. So this is very exciting. Remember, everyone, if you have any questions for Jonas during the talk, please put them in the Meetup channel, slack.sanity.io in #meetup, and we will get those questions answered at the end of Jonas's talk. All right, Jonas, the stage is yours.
Great. Yeah, I think you can see my screen, right? You should be able to. Yes? No? Yes. Works. Great. So yeah, what I want to be talking about today is how we've used Studio V3 to integrate the Studio into a Next.js app to have a really seamless editorial experience for editors that want to create their own sales journeys, basically. So first of all, hey to everyone joining. Nice to meet you all. About me, I'm the founder and CTO of Kickstart.ds. We're building a starter kit for design systems, and I'm also the CTO of Rumesmile, the agency behind Kickstart.ds. Before we worked on Kickstart.ds, I worked on websites mainly, interface, app design since 2005, so some years already. And before even that, I studied computer science in Bonn. What is Kickstart.ds, you might ask? So just a quick summary. Kickstart.ds is a starter kit for design systems. So basically something your team, your digital team can use to create your own design system. So it's not a ready-made solution you just buy and use directly, but something you use as building blocks to create your own custom design system that's really tailored to your own needs. So a quick summary that we always use is a low-code framework and comprehensive component library enabling digital teams to create consistent and brand-compliant web front ends super efficiently. Lots of words, but I hope it will be understood. So what do I want to talk about today? What I want to show is how good components, that would be the Kickstart.ds part, and Sanity, that would be the CMS part of what I show, enable the development of custom editor interfaces, something we're really passionate about. And we did this with just 3 devs and just 3 weeks. So a bunch of threes here. So who was the customer? The customer was Encore, which is a spin-off of a large energy supply company, utility company in Germany. They wanted to, or they are building digital platforms and an ecosystem for the energy market here in Germany mainly. That is used to enable companies that have complex products and services to simplify their own processes and how they work with all those services and how they sell them. They are also official partner of SAP and Power Cloud and have apps listed on their marketplaces, so they're pretty well connected on that part too. The project itself was about creating specialized sales journeys. So they always need to sell their services to customers and want to have real flexibility in doing that. And that means that they want to freely mix custom content with structured blocks, like asking for your zip code or stuff like that, that's needed to find the correct offer for you. And that what they really wanted was a seamless editing experience, which gives the user all the control and freedom, which is also one of the important usability heuristics by Nielsen Norman. I think it's number 3, right? Another 3 threes now. Yeah, and what they wanted is also consistency over all of that. So all the CMS content and all those structured blocks should all share the same layout and design in the end, so the user will not be confused when using the product. They also wanted support for different display modes for those journeys. I'll get to what a journey really is. I think that could be a bit abstract right now, but they wanted to have different display modes for those. And they also need multi-tenancy and white labeling, because they sell this solution that we've worked on to different German energy companies that have their own different look and feel, for example. So they also needed customizability for those tenants. So one tenant might want to have a specific block that's styled differently, or even a whole different way of displaying such a user journey. So let's just get to it, to the interesting part, I think. So what we're starting here is the login to the backend of the whole solution, which is not a Next.js app. This is a Rails app we're looking at. So I have to choose a service, and I have to switch to a different tenant right here, which has journeys configured already. So what I'm seeing here is a list of journeys. This is still the Rails app, and I want to show 2 in specific. That is one. Where is it? This one. I just open the front end part first. So you always have such a page that is at the start of a journey, so you can add some content, really connecting to the user, showing him why he should start this journey. And it always has a button to start the journey itself. So I'll just click this and I get into the journey. So we have a small header and a bunch of steps, they are called. So every journey consists of steps, and those are the first part that the editor can choose himself. So he really has full control over how many steps, how many blocks per step, and so on. So I can go through here, and I have to mention all this is in German, so sorry about that. I try to explain what I'm doing. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but otherwise just ask in the chat. So yeah, I can go through here. I'll not do the whole thing, but you get the point. I can go through here. And in the end, when I send it, I get to a small page that says, great, this was successful, and you get the information. So all of this, what you've seen, should be controllable by the editor in the end. To show you what I meant with different display modes for journeys, I can open this one, for example. It also has such a page at the start. And if I go into the journey, I see this version, which is a slider version. So also here I can take some selections. For example, those products are pulled from a PIM system, product inventory management solution. I can choose such a wallbox, for example. I can enter my zip code. Let's click quickly click through here to get to the end. So really flexible, lots of content mixed with structured stuff. In the end, I get a summary for all of this, and I can send it again. And I see this page again. Yeah, so this is pretty much what the user would see when using such a journey made by an editor. So let's jump into the really interesting part, the editor part. So when I click on edit here, you see that this opens. And this is the Next.js app we've talked about. So it's a React app and using Next.js in the background. And it's running on top of this Rails backend. When I push leave, I'll just be back here. So I can click into and out of it, but let's keep in here. So basically, you have 3 tabs up here, which correspond to the general settings of such a journey, which is Strecke in Deutsch for journey. You have the structure of a journey, which consists of all the steps. So I can close all those. And you see that those are quite a lot. And in each step, there are a bunch of blocks. But quickly back to the general settings. So what you can do here is give it a name. You can change the display mode, which can be on one page, which is the first journey we saw. It can be 1 step per page, and it can be slider, which is the one we just looked at. And additionally, you can choose a start and a confirmation page. So this is where it gets interesting, because already here you can see you can select from a bunch of pages, and those are all Sanity documents in the background. And I can even go in here and say, okay, I want to change maybe this page, and I get an embedded version of the studio right next to a live preview of it. So I could go in here and maybe I want to make it really important. So I could go into this headline and just add a bunch more exclamation marks. In real time too. So I can quickly go in here and configure the complete page as an editor. Too many scroll bars here. I can publish, and I can leave again. So where it gets really interesting is if I go into such a step, like for example, this one here, the first one, I have the name of a step. I can choose between all those steps right here. And I can see all the blocks that are part of this step. So for example, the first step is a combination of a free content, which is the first one, and a workflow choice. So workflow choice has effect on the way the next button, for example, could work. But the thing here for Sanity would be the first one, the free content again. So I can edit it, and I see here, I have some general settings, for example, this headline here, which is displayed at the top. I can choose some generic stuff like the spacing before and after, or I could even make this dark or inverted. Those are settings that are there for all the blocks, Sanity content blocks and structured blocks. And finally, I can choose from the contents themselves, which are those here. Those are also pulled from Sanity. Those are documents, not the same type as the pages we saw before. But for example, I could switch to that video content here, and it automatically updates inside the preview too. So you have a mixed preview with those structured blocks. For example, this one is one that's right in here. So I could also maybe add an exclamation mark here. It also gets live updated. So it's a mixed live preview of the Sanity content and the content of the journey itself. I can also, when I'm here, go directly into the content. So like we saw for the page before, I can jump into here and just quickly go, for example, here, and let's, for example, say we want to have that box on the lower left instead. That would be this. Or maybe I want a different background. I'm not sure that's doing anything right now. Because the color is set here. I could remove this. Yeah. So it's really easy to go in here and create the content you like. You can even go in here and, let me do that maybe, create a new block, say free content. Maybe quickly show that again. We have lots of different blocks. Create a new free content, and I can create a new content from here too. So I could say I want to have a new content, and I can choose from a bunch of components that are part of Kickstart.ds. This is where our part or component part comes into the picture, and I can, for example, choose the visual, which is a big element, having a background image. Maybe that's too complex. Let's choose something easier. Remove this again. But you see, it's really seamless. It's just embedded alongside the other stuff here. Let's choose a text media, for example. And I can put text in here. Close this again. Choose the content. And it should be, where is it? Here it is, yeah. Maybe go into here again to show how it's actually updating. But everything is live updated here. That works great. So I can close that again. I can go into here and rearrange those ones as I'd like. I can jump to the different steps and choose other stuff here. So it's really flexible for the editor. And he never leaves this interface, which is really nice for the editing experience. We have some other stuff that's cool in here too. Like you can, let me show that. For example, show product information. And when you use this one, let's put it to the top so we actually see it updating. You see a bunch of products that are pulled from the product inventory management system. So, for example, I could use this one and I get a preview of that content, which in this case is a wall box, which makes sense for your energy utility company. Yeah, I can also pull up the preview from here. Maybe one thing to add, I think I need to refresh before because it's saved in the background. One interesting thing is everything I do in the interface right here can be done, you can use undo and redo to to revert changes. For example, I could maybe take this one, order it up here. I could go into the settings and change the name, even the type, for example. So all of this can be undone and redone, which is really nice for the editor and speaks to the kind of UI we wanted to build, which doesn't really allow the editor to make mistakes or lasting mistakes. Let's call it like that. So you see here, it jumps back and forth. So this is really nice to have a safe and editing environment, which we think is really important for editors to feel empowered in the end. So let me think about other stuff right here. I think that is mainly this part. You can copy the state of such a journey complete with all the stuff in it. So you could send it to a colleague of yours, so he could use it as a baseline to start. Or you could have your catalog of journeys saved that you pull from when creating new journeys, for example. Those are the ideas that are in play here. I also have to say this is pretty early, so it's in use for the first client, I think, but it's really, really early. So we've just started to build this, and we think it's really impressive already. You also have different modes for dark mode and not dark mode. Let me think. Yeah, maybe one thing to show off, I think that would be the last thing too. We also thought about the ways that those teams work, because that did not work. Why did that not work? Okay. I'm not sure why this did not work. Because you can just go into the interface, the Sanity Studio itself too. Let me see from history maybe. No, it's not working any longer. That's unfortunate. Maybe it's in here somewhere. Yeah, I'm not sure I can show that then, but we have a full studio too, because you have those teams most of the time the teams have different roles in them. So one person would be the one creating actual journeys, whereas the content team maybe would be the one working on the contents. So let's see, maybe I can get to it from here. Maybe I'll just add a screenshot of it into the Meetup chat later. Yeah, not sure why this is not working. That worked before. Yeah, this is the API, but that's not the part I was interested in. Okay, I think I have it. Let me just quickly reverse engineer that. Yes, okay, here we go. So this would be the full studio. So you have the free contents I've shown you before. So you could just create them from here too. So this could be a different team just working on the content, whereas the main team would be working on the journeys and just connects the journey up to the content that's created by the content team in the backend. Okay, good that this did work in the end. And that's pretty much it. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Oh, this is the first slide again. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Wow, thanks for that talk. So I'm used to seeing the studio a certain way, not embedded in another app. And so it took me a while to realize, oh, that's the studio right there. That's a really cool, I don't know, just the design. It seemed very intuitive, very seamless. Let me unshare.
Yeah, there's quite a few mind-blown emojis in the chat here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really seamless. That's why we chose that for the title too, because we think that's the really impressive part about it, because the editor never has to leave his interface. He can always stay in it. He always has live previews. So it's really nice what you can do with Sanity v3 already. So yeah.
That's amazing. So we do have a couple questions from the community. Yeah. Cody asked, are you using next-sanity/studio for embedding v3?
Yes, we use that and a bunch of other stuff too, because the previews, I think, are just regular old Grok queries running for the draft or non-draft versions of the documents. So you could also have, as a user, the page open in the journey. And when in the background, the editor publishes a new version of the content, it would live update for the user, which is also pretty funky, at least we think.
Right on.
But yeah, for the connection part, the embedding part, we use the Next Sanity, I think is the project on GitHub too.
Right on. And then Magnus Holm, one of our speakers today, asked, some of the data, so the general settings, was edited outside of the studio in the Next app. Is this stored outside of Sanity? And if so, are you planning on moving it to Sanity later?
Not entirely sure if we want to move it to Sanity later. Right now, it's stored in a Rails backend in a pretty, let's say, structured way. We have a JSON schema that describes the structure of this whole thing, and it gets saved into the Rails backend, which can do stuff like upgrades and stuff like that. We've not thought about that really that much. We've really focused on the content part for Sanity, because one thing we always see for clients is this basic need to be able to combine their structured stuff with free-form content. And that's really a huge problem for lots of teams that have to switch systems. They have to have a different tab open for their content. They have to know how to connect it. And this is really so much better with this approach, we think.
Yeah.
It's really impressive, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then we have one more question. I'll let Martin take that one.
Right, let's see. So seeing as V3 is still in dev preview phase, have you found any dragons that you would caution people about if they were to start using V3?
I don't think so. I mean, we did some, I would say, hacky stuff to get it looking like that, like you saw. So for example, you maybe stumbled upon the missing header information for the Embedded Studio, which would be why you maybe not directly recognize it. We just disabled that with pretty hard important statements in CSS. So that would be one thing. And we had some trouble, I'm not sure if we still have it, with image uploads. So I'm not too sure that image uploads currently work completely fine from inside the Embedded Studio part. I think it's related to the URL handling. So that would be gotchas that we had, but those were very minor, I'd say.
All right.
Right on. There's a couple more questions. I think we can, let's just get them. I was going to say, so there's a question from Ethan. So is content running in Studio V2 and Journey Editor running in V3?
I think it's all V3. I don't know if you could mix that. I'm not sure, actually, but it should be all V3. To be honest.
Okay, cool. And then one more. From Keisha, are you using MongoDB on the back end with Rails or Postgres SQL with JSON-B?
I think it's Postgres, but don't quote me on that. That's not the part we've actually worked on. So basically what you saw with the Rails backend, and when I clicked on edit to get into the Next.js app, the blue one, that was the point that we took over. So we just built the app that's bootstrapped from there. So it's a React app that gets started in the browser, and we had an API definition. I think when debugging the full-blown studio, you shortly saw the OpenAPI definition for that. So we just have an OpenAPI contract between the front-end and back-end that really tells us how to structure the stuff that gets saved, but that was not directly our job.
Yeah, cool. Great stuff. Great demo. Great project. It all looks
really awesome. If you have more questions, I'll hop over into the chat too. So just feel free to ask there. Yeah, definitely go head on over to the chat. There's a lot of mind blown emojis being thrown around. This was very cool. So thank you for sharing. If you want to follow Jonas on Twitter, we just put the link for Jonas's Twitter in the chat. And if you have more questions for Jonas, you know where to find with that link. And then, thank you so much, Jonas, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It was a joy.
All right. So let's remind everyone real quick where to find our chat. So at slack.sanity.io in #meetup, that's where you can find us. We are throwing threads and emojis and lots of love around over there. So definitely go say hi. But we have our next speaker up.
It's the place to be for sure. Yeah, next up is Jonathan from Roboto Studio. Jonathan will tell us about some of the strategies they use to make sure that they are communicating clearly with their clients about Sanity. And I'm super excited about this talk ever since he proposed it.
Yeah. Let me bring Jono on stage.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, really, really good. It's getting nice. The nice sunset coming over the back of the window. So yeah, having a real good time.
All right. Well, where are you joining from?
We're joining from Nottingham, so the very Midlands of the UK, which is really nice. It's pretty autumnal here as well. But we've had a pretty strong summer so far, which is kind of nice.
All right, we'll just remind everyone that if you have questions for Jonathan, put them in the Slack. We'll pick them up and ask him in the Q&A session at the end of the talk. And with that, the stage is yours, Jonathan.
Lovely. Cool. So this is the Cutting Through the Jargon, Demystifying Sanity. So a little introduction. My name's Jono. I'm the founder of Roboto Studio. I've been a founder here for 5 years, and I'm a massive enthusiast in structured content, and I'm a vocal cat parent. So the cat on the left is Kiki, cat on the right is Kevin. How I got inspired to actually write this talk and sort of communicate all the different bits and pieces that's inside of here. We had a lot of clients come to us with kind of a mystification around Sanity, trying to understand exactly how Sanity works, how the bits and pieces fit together. And we wanted to essentially write this up to give kind of like an all-encompassing, very high-level overview of how we've personally worked with Sanity. And it's been, you know, a great learning curve to understand what bits are missed out from the general knowledge about headless. So I thought I'd start with one of the things that keeps getting essentially popped around on the Slack channels, which is structured content. If you've had the opportunity to check out the event recently, it was very, very cool. But I kind of have a lot of people actually ask me about structured content. And I'm probably going to upset a lot of people here by saying this, but it's just data. It's essentially data that is constructed in such a way that you're able to mix and match. And essentially, in the old days, the way that websites used to work, you used to have a very rigid, monolithic, and I'll come back to monolithic a little bit later, monolithic way of having a title and the description and then the main body of text. And that would typically be your content management system experience. However, now we're having much more of a focus on kind of narrative and the way that we actually structure our websites to be really tailored for customers. And structured content is kind of like a great aid to that. It's the ability to kind of shuffle around all the pieces of content and make sure that everything looks the way you would expect it to look as a client, and kind of pass over visuals of certain ways. So there was a great talk by one of the founders at Sanity where he talks about e-commerce sites and one being a luxury one versus one being just a very simple look at this, the size of this bolt and the dimensions of it. So if you can think about that, that's the same thing with structured content. And this brings me on to a content lake. Now, the content lake is the one that we found that clients find the most confusing. And to be honest with you, I don't blame them to a certain extent. A content lake is very, very powerful if you sell kind of more the strategy behind why you would use one, more so than the actual core functionality of what one does, because the core functionality is very ethereal in my opinion, and to most clients I believe it feels the same way. So a content lake being more of a means to an end is kind of the way that we talk about this quite a lot, and I hope you'll see why in a second. So let's go for a real world example. So I've just a few seconds ago had a little Google because I didn't know the exactitudes about these. But you want to put out a social media post that's of your website. You've put out a new blog post. You want to share it on LinkedIn. You want to share it on Twitter. You want to share it on Facebook. So we've all been on LinkedIn and we've all seen those terribly cropped little thumbnails that you see inside of the feed. And I kind of want to give some sympathy to why that happens and kind of a bit more of an explanation for most people that aren't developers. So this is generally how it usually goes for an end client. And I think it's very important to sympathize with this and understand why it works like this to be able to kind of improve it in the future. So you decide you want to make a blog post, you work out what your image wants to be, and you start to work on, say, Photoshop, and you work out which platforms you're using. So if you're using, let's go for the big three. Let's go LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. So you go onto Photoshop, you read a little bit on the internet and you say, oh, it's, what is it, 1200 by 630, I think it is for Facebook. So you set up a canvas, 1200 by 630, you build the image out, you export it for the web. When you're exporting for the web, you're probably exporting something like PNG, JPEG, and you upload the image inside of your content management system. And then as soon as you do that, you share the blog post and you realize it's the wrong size. Now you're back to square one. So that is typically how it goes. And that's typically how you get something in LinkedIn where you realize it looks beautiful on Facebook, terrible on LinkedIn. So the content lake, in my opinion, is really well suited for this. And this is kind of the key point that people, because they have these pain points, they have these experiences. So let's take it again in a very similar manner when we say we're going to build an image in Photoshop. We're going to leave a little bit of space on each side for cropping. We're going to export the image for the web. So everything's pretty much the exact same as the first time. We upload the image. And then this is where the real magic of the content lake works, which is that you've essentially got multiple, providing you obviously put the code in there from a development side, but you have multiple different queries that you can use to have multiple different croppings of the same image. So having that version where if you look on LinkedIn, it looks fantastic, pixel perfect. You have it on Facebook, pixel perfect. And the same with Twitter. Every single version of this blog post looks fantastic. Now, because there is that essential pain point with this previously, and there is a lot of people that have had this pain point, it's a great example to kind of explain how the content lake works. I know there is a lot more information that can come from the content lake. There's a lot more to do with CDNs, and there's more to do with file distribution and everything else. But the real core thing here is what will probably happen for most clients on a day-to-day basis. And this is a good example for us. Which kind of moves me on to the next part of why I explain with clients how Sanity works and why it's a little bit different. And again, this is in my opinion, so this isn't the official terms, but Sanity is a code-based content management system. And that is something that I really want to hammer across whenever we talk to clients. The reason being is I'll show you the opposite first, a GUI-based content management system. So I'm guessing most people have probably used these as a developer, and they're fantastic for certain things. They're fantastic for things like a very simple blog, a very simple page builder. But again, the more they kind of scale, the more it becomes problematic. But the real benefit of these things is that they're easy to get started with. And the problem that comes at a later date is the ability to kind of validate your schema. And again, by saying validate schema, the way your actual page gets built, the validation of that is kind of very important to emphasize. Comparatively, the code base, so we're coming back to Sanity here, you have this ability for it to be far more customizable. And again, explaining to clients about the fact that you can take a relatively simple thing like a conditional. So say you want to have a link that works externally and a link that works internally. You might say that, not many things support the idea of a conditional, where if you want to go and put an internal link, which again, we can use something like Next.js, where it improves performance, they will definitely be on board with the performance side from the SEO basis. But again, it's going back to this idea of defining the actual benefits you get rather than the core functionality, rather than the declarative things, code-based, scalability. They're all very ethereal. So talking about this, we'll go on to Grok. Now, when I first heard it, I did think it was genuinely like some goblin name or something like that. Sounds pretty fun. But essentially, Grok is kind of one of the most, I guess, misunderstood things when we talk to clients about this. Because I think if you use, going back to the same idea, the principle of a pain point, you could say something along the lines of, we have Grok, there's a real issue with Grok, There's a real issue with performance on websites. And say, for example, you're taking all the data from all the different pages, all the different blog posts. That's a real issue because you have to have something compute and read through all of that. And you also have to take the data for all of that. Whereas if you have something like Grok, you have the ability to kind of whittle down content and make sure that it's very intelligent in the way that you're only pulling essentially the data that you need for the page at that time. And this brings me on to portable text. So I'm going to ruffle a couple of feathers on this one as well. So portable text is an incredible tool, and we think it's absolutely fantastic. It's been one of the things that really differentiated Sanity for us as a platform. But every client we speak to with portable text, it's not a kind of like, it's not at the forefront of thought as to when to use this, because it is quite a hard thing to explain as to when this is actually useful. And now for us, one of the things that we always say is with portable text, it's the idea of extending out a rich text editor. So you're essentially adding the ability to do a lot of incredible stuff for the client. And I'll tell you exactly the way that you might potentially speak about this is that you say, we're working, as you have a traditional website, you have a traditional blog, what you keep seeing as a common theme, a common design practice is midway down the page, somewhere after a particularly interesting paragraph, you might get a little newsletter sign-up box. Now, in the old days, the way that you would do this is by doing it where, for example, it just says, after, let's say, 500 characters or something along those lines, we pop in a newsletter box. Now with portable text, you can extend the granularity of the control of portable text, and you could literally have inserting a newsletter field where you feel it's necessary on the blog posts. And again, the same applies with related content. Kind of pinning those ethereal ideas into something that is a very tangible, very common design language principle is a great way to basically explain a lot of the functionality there. So again, we're going back to why does it matter? And it brings it down to these three things, which is performance, scalability, and maintainability. So we always talk about performance, and usually when we're talking about performance, there is an arms race at the moment for everybody to try and get the world's fastest website, which is great, but ultimately it's a means to an end to have a much more accessible experience, to have a much better journey, and to have a much better search engine ranking. So essentially we use those 3 points rather than kind of, oh, it's just performance. And again, with scalability, it's a return on investment. You build the website, you want to make sure that when you have this website, you have something that you can really build on top of and use for more than just 1 or 2 years. And the same with maintainability. This kind of rolls into the scalability aspect, which is that you can consistently keep building block after block after block onto the website. So again, seen it time and time again, the idea is that these pain points are really, really important to contextualize why you're using a headless content management, why you do all of these development features. And it's very, very important to try and help the client choose the correct tool. 2 seconds, little water break. Apologies, I've been on talks all day. And so I thought we would do questions we've been asked by clients, because it's very, very common that we get hit by these. So how's the editing experience? Now, this one comes up quite a lot. I thought I'd go for a little bit of a Family Feud if you're from America, or I think it's Family Fortunes in the UK. It's basically the same game. But how's the editing experience? This comes up every single time whenever we work with the client, because editing experience, in our opinion, is the be all and end all of how much a client appreciates a content management system. So with the ability and with thinking about how you actually structure these, I would always advise spend a little bit of extra time on doing things from a user experience perspective. So the whole idea of having accessibility on Sanity, having things like something that really makes a difference, in our opinion, is preparing fields and using fields where you can actually throw in a title or an image or an icon, something that just basically boosts your work above, the norm. So making a better user experience overall is going to make you seem like a better developer. And as for how this actually works with a client, the editing experience is phenomenal. Maintainability, again, we're saying this, we've gone through this a little bit, but essentially the maintainability of working with Sanity is fantastic. Very, very rarely, it's only because we're having such a quantum leap from V2 to V3 that there has been, somewhat of a migration process for ever so long. It's been consistent, and it's been, you wouldn't have to require to do any migration process. So the maintainability is absolutely top notch. And that paired with the headless aspect of it, with, for example, Next.js, there's very, very little other than updating packages that an actual client would need to do. So again, kind of talking about that side of it is always very helpful. Headless gets asked as one of our most common questions. So headless is talked about a lot. What it actually means to a client is a totally different kettle of fish. So when you're actually talking about headless to a client, remember that this pure and like this core technology kind of exists in a very development heavy environment. So a good way of kind of describing this and ensuring that everybody is on board with this is explaining the difference between monolithic and headless. I think there's a real value to be taken from that, to be able to explain how a technology that you use today might not necessarily be the most viable technology 3 years down the line for the front end. Or, for example, you may want to use your content management system to multiple different locations, to apps, to other different places. So kind of pushing that idea of the outcome of this rather than the core functionality is always very important, in my opinion. Time to market, again, the beauty of working with Sanity, the beauty of working with Next.js and other headless frameworks, and for example, Gatsby, the time to market is really, really fast. So you are essentially testing very quickly. And again, talking about A/B testing, Optimizely, all that kind of stuff, you can take what is a very simple website from start to finish in a very short period of time. And again, clients are really going to appreciate that honesty about how this would work. Sanity V3, of course, we absolutely love this. We're really appreciating it at the moment. We've had to go with a couple of different environments, and it's always great to stay up to date with these kind of things. Explain the developer experience and how that kind of knocks on to the end client. So, for example, development experience is better. It means you get a faster turnaround, goes back to the time to market. It's a great way of talking also about the extendable components, but again, not just talking about extendable components, what that actually does to the end client. So, for example, there was a great one on Sanity's documentation where they talk about a open and closing day from Monday to Friday. Having something that is very, very easy for data entry like that makes a massive difference for somebody. Performance. Now, surprisingly, this is a bit of a misnomer one. So we have a lot of people talk to us about performance, but it's very much something that is just a known, is after a certain point, is less important than the actual design, the core content management experience, in our opinion. I know that's a bit of a controversial take, but essentially, once you start hitting the 90s, I think people are more interested with how they would actually interact with the website and more interested with how the editing experience is. Again, this is just completely anecdotal from what we've experienced in the business. And ultimately, why should we pick Sanity as a content management system? So usually whenever we have clients come to us, they're debating between 2-3 different headless content management systems. So what I would always do, just in general, is brush up on other systems, have a look at all the different versions. Ultimately, we've been a big backer of Sanity because at the end of the day, 90% of all the headless content management, well, this is completely plucked out of thin air, but the majority of content management systems that we've used that are headless are almost always a GUI-based content management system, which means they'll have issues with scalability. So understanding how that affects a client is very important, especially long-term when you're talking about 100-page websites, 200-page websites. And then finally, how's the customer experience? So this one actually comes up quite a lot because we've had a lot of people that have potentially been burnt by other companies. So kind of the reinforcement, and personally the same, I had an incredible experience with Sanity from day one with the community. So I've had a lot of people talk to me, both community members and members of the Sanity team. So it's always great to be honest and say, look, this is a thriving community. Speak to some of the people on there, get in touch, because ultimately at the end of the day, we find that transparency and that honesty about how the tool works. Go speak to some of the people in the community is a great way to essentially win over somebody onto the Sanity CMS. So essentially, that's all the different ways that we would typically approach a client to ensure that everything is absolutely top notch when we're talking about how we will build a website. So I hope that's helped for somebody that's aspiring freelancers or anybody that's going out there to start their own agency. And yeah, thanks for listening. Has anybody got any questions?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I think you inadvertently started a campaign for making a goblin mascot for Grok. So that's apparently going to happen now. We got one question from Ethan in the chat. Are you using V3 with clients already?
We're using it currently with 3 separate clients, and we are using it. We have an internal CLI system that basically spins up an environment for us. We were a bit hesitant. So to anybody else that was considering actually doing this, I was very, very hesitant to run with a development environment with a client. But we have found only 1 or 2 bugs with it so far. And to be honest with you, they're fairly negligible bugs. It's been probably the most solid a development preview we've ever experienced. So yeah, I highly recommend doing it. It's a bit living on the edge. I think Symbian actually told us that, but it's definitely worth doing. I would definitely recommend it. At the very least, check it out in your own time for development wise.
All right. I know you have a very nice blog post about your experience with V3 on your website, which I encourage everyone to check out. let's see. What are the most challenging terms or concepts to explain about Sanity? Are there some that are just so inscrutable you don't touch it, or?
Oh, that is a good question. Let me think about this for a second. So I think not so much sanity, but I think something that's very difficult to overcome is somebody that's been burnt by a headless content management system, which does happen to us quite a fair bit. So a lot of our work is actually refactoring to get a headless content management system working. Most of the time, and as much as I wouldn't like to say this, it usually does end up having to be a rebuild because of previous opinionation and such. So for me, the biggest things that typically come up is we've used this headless content management system before, we've been burnt by it. How do we know we're not going to get burnt again with Sanity? How do we know it's not a flavor of the month? And I think if you want my honest way that I would respond to this is explain the focus on structured content, explain how they're very much pushing for the user experience content management wise, which is pretty much unprecedented as far as I'm concerned, for kind of like the whole, running an entire event over it is a good example of as to why to use it. So yeah, I guess that would be the trickiest one that comes up, and it does come up quite a lot. I have a feeling that would be something that you might get questioned about if you go into freelance and have that.
That's a very interesting angle. It's kind of like teaching them to love again after being hurt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have one, Cap?
Yeah. So I loved your talk. Canute in the chat said the Sanity marketing team is all eyes and ears. And it's so true. It's like this is bridging that gap between the content editors and the developers. And so a lot of great content. But what do you find is like the most common aha moment for your clients? And like, when does it finally click for them? At what point do you find that most common?
I think, do you know what's a great winner for this, in my opinion, is the previews. So previews specifically with Sanity are really impressive. So we always advise anybody that wants to get a nice vote of confidence is get an environment that works with, in our specific way, we always build with Next.js. So I'll speak from a Next.js background, but having a Next.js preview available with an editing experience on the side of it and the real time seeing that when you make changes, it appears on the left and right of the screen is hugely, hugely valuable. So understanding kind of what the day-to-day life would be of a marketing person that comes along and wants to build a website and wants to edit the website and trying to basically wow them the most. So yeah, the iframe pane, I think it is, was incredible for that.
That makes sense. That's a good one.
Yeah, I love that that functionality as well. All right, thank you so much, Jonathan. You can find Jonathan and Roboto Studio on Twitter, and we'll share his link. And you can also find Jonathan in our community Slack.
Great stuff. Thanks for having me on both. Take care.
Thank you, Jono. All right.
Yeah. So I'm frequently blown away by how cool presentations we get from the community, and to show a token of our gratitude, we will be sending a hoodie to both our community speakers. Keep an eye out for that link in your inbox. And again, thank you so much, and thank you to the community for the great questions. Awesome.
Yes. Thank you, Jonas. Thank you, Jono. And if any of you listening want to ever speak at a meetup, reach out to any of us, and we are always looking for speakers. So yeah. But yeah, if you are just joining or you don't know where to find us because the chat is disabled on YouTube, the chat is at slack.sanity.io in #meetup. There's a lot going on over there. All right. So up next, we have Holm, Magnus Holm, who is our one of our internal speakers. I'll bring Magnus on.
Hello. Can you hear me fine?
Yes. All right. So you're going to be speaking on Grok-1 with the new rebranding we just did with the Goblin. So
Yeah, obviously. Of course.
yeah. But where are you joining us from?
I'm actually in Portugal, in a tiny town called Monchique.
Nice.
And I'm actually I'm sorry about the light here. I'm
That's
in
okay.
a tiny Airbnb, and it's I'm hacking this very much. So it's going to be interesting.
That's okay. We're excited.
Yeah.
So yeah, if any of you have questions for Home after the talk or during the talk, put them in the chat and we will get those answered in the Q&A after the talk. The stage is yours, Home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Can you see my slides? Well, actually, I can't hear any feedback, so I'm going to assume you can see my slides. So I'm going to talk about growing Grok, and then more specifically, Grok the Goblin, which we rebranded just recently. So a bit about me first. My name is Magnus Holm. I'm a principal engineer at Sanity, and I should just clarify first that I typically go just by Holm at Sanity, because it turns out there's another Magnus, and he happens to be the CEO. So often you will see me just mentioned as Holm. But I will also reply to Magnus. I'm very open for anything. You can call me whatever you want. It's gonna be fine. And I've been working here for 3 years. I've been doing quite a lot with Grok, in addition to the rest of the team. And I'm going to talk a bit about Grok. And we all know that Grok is a goblin, but it's really about just giving you all the power to actually work with your data. And I think it links very much well into what was mentioned in the previous talk about putting stuff into your content lake. And then it's all about that you can just put the stuff there, and then you know that you can get it out in the right way and get just the data you need. For instance, for performance reasons. So more specifically, when we talk about Grok, we say that it's a query language. So maybe not all of you here have looked into Grok yet, if you're new to it. So I thought I'd just go through a tiny example. And then it's fine if you don't understand everything. This is it's a complicated thing because it's a completely new query language, which is complicated, and that is fine. So this is an example of a Grok query. And what this more concretely does is that it goes through all of our posts in our studio, and then it finds everything that's been written by me. Sorry about that example. And then it sorts them by when it's been published and gives up some data. So the way we typically think about these Grok queries is that even though it's very flexible and you can do whatever you want, you will see that most queries have a very common shape. And this shape it starts with a star, because the star is about all of your content. And then it goes on with a filter, which is about getting the content you need so that you only get the tiny bit of content you're interested in. And then it goes about getting only the fields you're interested in. And then maybe you do some ordering and make sure you get in the right order. So all of this is to kind of enable you to make sure your front end gets only the data it needs, and that you can be super, super flexible. So for instance, in this case, you see that I'm actually filtering by my name, which is stored in a separate document, and authors is actually an array. There can be multiple authors. So in essence, this is doing quite complicated stuff. And it's all available for you to easily get out. And I know what you're all saying if you're seeing this for the first time, or maybe the second time as well. And that is, oh no, this is yet another thing to learn. It's another thing we need to know. And I can see that it is annoying to learn new things. And actually, from our perspective, we also are kind of annoyed. It's for us, this was another thing to invent. We didn't want to invent this. It would be much better if we didn't have to invent this. Because we actually think there are other great stuff out there, but they are just not good enough for our use case. So SQL, it's great. We use it a lot, but it is just really, really clunky for any sort of JSON. And GraphQL, it's also great, but it's honestly, it's not really a query language in the traditional sense of what we call a query language. Because the whole purpose of a query language is that you give all the flexibility to the developer to get the exact data it needs to the front-end developer to get all the data it needs. But GraphQL is very much limited in that sense. So even though they call themselves a query language, it's not really a query language. But we still think it's great. So all of this cost us to basically, we realized we need another thing, and that another thing became Grok. And when we look at Grok, we think that Grok is pretty good. And it solves some real needs. And like as you saw in the query before, you can do quite complicated stuff. But we're also very much aware that it is really, really far from perfect. And therefore, we should make it better. We should improve it. And this is what we've been starting doing, or we have tried to do, and it's been like a long project, longer than you think maybe, because a lot has been going on behind the scenes. And then what you see now, or may have seen, is that a few weeks ago we released a new version which adds some new functionality. So there are a bunch of new functions. So string starts with, string split, and then some array functions, and then some math functions. So all of this is available today. You can use them, and you can do more cool stuff with Grok. So it's becoming a bit better. And actually, I thought I would show like some examples of these, just to show like how they can be useful, and maybe show some cool Grok. And I'm gonna also talk a bit more about sort of the process behind here. So array join is a very simple function, which you might have seen in many other languages. It's the standard join function, which you have in like Python and Ruby and many other languages as well. And what it does is that it takes in an array of strings, and then it concatenates them together and puts a delimiter in between. So for instance, one use case you could have for this is that you might want to get all of your blog posts out, and when they have multiple authors, you just want to combine them with a comma, so that you just get one string for all of your authors. And now with the array join, you can very easily accomplish this. Of course, for me personally, it's always like a tricky question whether you want to do this inside Grok, or whether you want your front end to get all the data, like get the raw data, and then you do this on the front end side. And sometimes it just depends. And there's, from my perspective, there's really no right answer. Sometimes you want to get the raw data. Sometimes it's nice to get the more derived data, if you could say it that way. But we hope this will be helpful in those cases where we realize like, I don't really want all of this raw data. I just give me the authors with a comma in between. Honestly, it can't be that hard. And now it isn't. And also, when I wrote up this example, I realized that another common way of writing authors is, or when you write a list, is that you do a comma separated list, and then you have and then you have the last element. So I figured, shouldn't we also be able of solving that? And this is where I think like the sort of the power of Grok shines, because you could imagine that, to do this, you would use another function. You would have like join with and or something like that. But with Grok, we don't actually need to do that. We can actually solve this just by using array join and some more complicated stuff in between. So yeah, if you're new to Grok, this might seem even more complicated, but I don't think it's too bad. It reads quite sensibly. So this is like an example where first we just fetch out all of the authors. We get those author as just as a string of array of string. And then at the end here, we check first for the case where if it's a single author, we just need to handle that specially, and then we just return that author names. And otherwise, we will take every name except the last one, combine with a comma, add the and then add the last name. So by just writing all of this code, and then you can run it against our blog, and you will see how it will nicely show single authors properly, and with two authors, there's an and then with three authors, there's also a comma. So once again, you could question whether you should be doing this in your queries or whether you want to rather do it in your front end. But it's like pretty cool to show that it's possible and that you can actually like solve these needs, because sometimes it can really simplify what you're doing on the front end. And we think that's like a pretty cool use case. And yeah, I'm going through this very briefly, so feel free to ask in the chat more about how this actually works. Later on, I will reply as well. Yeah, and then let's also talk about array unique. So array unique is a function which takes in an array and then it removes all duplicates. And at first, when you hear about that, you will wonder, like, why is that useful? Like, I don't have duplicates in my arrays, so why would I care about that? Why would I remove duplicates? That's not so common. But there is one use case which is like very useful, and that is this expression you see here. If you write star._type, star is your whole data set. ._type means give me the type for the whole data set. And that would be like one big array for every document in your data set. And if you then unique that, you get a nice list of all the types in your data set. And this for me is like the first time, like when I get access to a new Sanity data set, I'll just always run this query. I would just like run this, look at the types, and then you can learn so much. You can learn about these different types and how they work. And it's like the first way of like understanding the schema is just understanding the types. And then you see a bit more what's actually in here. And this array unique also works with like subtypes. If you have a portable text, you can run it on all of the blocks and you can figure out like, oh, what are all the custom blocks you have here? Which is a nice way of looking at the actual data as opposed to only looking at the schema. So this array unique, it's a super cool trick, which I use just a lot. And finally, to give another cool example, string starts with is a function which takes in 2 strings, and then it returns true if the first string starts with the second string. So this is it's very useful for filtering, and there are just like some use cases, for instance, with internationalization, where you might want to use documents where at the end you have like the language as a part of the ID, and then you can use starts with to find all documents or all of the languages for a single version of the content. This was an example I saw a customer used and asked about, where they have a content of a document version, and then they wanted to figure all of their documents that were the version 1.0 to get them up to 1.1, for instance. So this is one of those where like, I don't feel like it comes up that often, but when it comes up, it solves like a really, really neat problem. Okay, so there are also like a bunch of these functions, and you also saw the math functions. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm going to talk a bit more about Grok itself, because as you see in here, you've seen like these functions, and you can see that Grok is growing a bit, and we have more functionality. But to me, actually, the more important thing that's happening is that it's growing up. And what I mean by that is that not only did we announce these functions and release these functions, we also made a bunch of other changes. So we have the spec of Grok, which we actually started a year ago. But now we have finally released a version which is like fully specified and describes exactly how Grok should behave. And this is actually quite a lot of work. Like this is all in the open. It's open source, anyone can use it, and it's like 2,000 lines of Markdown, which is a lot of Markdown. And this describes the exact semantics of how Grok behaves. And while we wrote this, we uncovered lots of like edge cases, and we had to figure out how Grok actually should behave. And for us, it's like very important to make sure that we can add more functionality into Grok and still make sure everything is like consistent and that we don't introduce bugs or weird behavior. And slightly related to this is also that we have a Grok test suite. So this is like an open source repo, anyone can check it out. And there we have currently 9,000 tests, which shows like this Grok should give this result. And we will continue adding. I think we were like 4,000 a few weeks ago. So we're adding more and more. And this can be used for anyone to like double check. And if anyone else wants to implement Grok, they are free to do that. And also very importantly, we have an open source JavaScript implementation. So this one, as a part of growing up, is now released in a stable version 1.0.0, and also we just released a 1.1.0. So this is now considered stable to be used, and it has a public API that you can trust, and you can take Grok queries and you can execute them wherever you want. So all of these functions that you saw before, they are very cool and you can use them today. But for me personally, like these changes here, like with having a proper spec that we can update, having a test suite running nicely, having the open source Grok JavaScript implementation, all of this just means like we are able to actually grow Grok even further. And I do hope that we can make even cooler stuff into Grok in the coming months. That is definitely my goal with all of these changes. So yes, that's what I had. I'm very interested in how it went.
It went very well. The community loves it. So I have a question. So there's a lot of new functions. Were a lot of these like community asks, or were these just ones that we knew we wanted to add, or?
I mean, the real secret here is that these were actually implemented way back. They actually been internally implemented like a year ago or something. And they were then partly based on community needs and partly based on other requests. And then what's actually taking the long time is double checking everything and making sure they are solid. But we do also have an internal list of proposals and other changes which are like tracked with what the community is asking for. So there is an open source, there is a repo called Grok where you can open issues. And we do, if you upvote anything there, we do count them and we look at them. And we will try to prioritize accordingly. But we will also have to focus on sometimes lower hanging fruits over what is being most upvoted, because some of the most upvoted ones are really tricky and requires time.
So follow up to that, what's like the average time it takes to make a new function for Grok?
Yeah, I mean, that's why like the average time is a very bad number, because now we spent like a year fixing the spec, but now the spec is proper. So now we're gonna see how quickly we can do stuff. So now it's gonna be like the real test. But it's always like, it's a super tricky thing, because like once we add a function, we're stuck with it forever. So sometimes it's not really about adding it, it's about realizing or understanding that it's a good thing to add. Because if we later realize, oh, this is very hard to optimize, or it has some weird behavior and it's going to be confusing, we still have to support it for years. So for us, like the reason things take a long time is not necessarily because it's difficult, it's just because like we're unsure whether it's the right thing, and yeah, it's a very tricky trade-off when you build a language.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have a great one from the communities, like here from Kisha. She asked, what's your top 5? And yeah, she just bumped it down to top 3 favorite Grok functions. What's your 3 favorite Grok functions, new or
already
old?
Exists or doesn't exist?
Hey, if you want to tell us what's going to be implemented next, that's cool.
No, yeah.
New or legendary?
Yeah, so the one thing I'm hoping most for is we have like this, and this has not really been properly sketched out and might not happen, but there is something about solving this dereferencing problem or duplication problem, where, for instance, with portable text, you use the same, like you have the same portable text multiple places, and you refer the same types, and just to get like the asset files, need to do like dereference and create many of these, like something there. We have some ideas there. And to be able to solve that I feel is like a very, very important and very nice. So I have some ideas there that I like to play with and see. And I think that was going to be very cool and solve some real needs. But yeah, about favorite features, for me, it's a lot easier to talk about the least favorite features, because these are the ones that kind of annoys me. And those are unfortunately the ones I think about more, and trying to avoid that we make the same mistakes in the future. So unfortunately, it's like all of the complicated edge cases are the ones that I know more about than the cool stuff.
You want to point something out specifically, or should we just?
That's annoying. I mean, like the whole array traversal logic, when you do like a square bracket and dot another square bracket. It works pretty well, but it's super complicated behind the scenes. So and it's like, it's kind of strange, because it's intuitively it works okay, and often you can just write what you think and it works out to be correctly. but the rules behind there are just so messy and so strange. So yeah.
All right, we got the last one from Cody. When can we get syntax highlighting for Grok on GitHub? I assume that's up to you.
Oh wow, yeah, that's all up to me. I'm gonna pick a deadline right now. No, I'm gonna have to be very diplomatic and say that yeah, we're going to have to look into that.
All right. Yeah, thank you once again. There's a lot of action in the Meetup channel, so do go have a look.
Yeah, I will.
And thank you so much for this great presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Mom.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, see ya. All right, so we have one more, a demo.
Yeah. Yes, our last speaker, Daniel from our solutions engineer team, will do a demo on Studio V3. I'm not at all sure what it's going to be about, so I'm excited.
Let's bring Daniel on. Hi, Daniel.
Hey, folks. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited about that Grok unique function. Exactly that, finding all the types in a data set, something we do every day. Yeah.
It's a great one-liner. So I see I did actually have a description of your talk here. You are going to show us how to build plugins that enhance the built-in input fields in V3. Input fields is always near and dear to my heart. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This is going to open up a lot of things that were, doable, but going to make a lot of things possible in version 3 that will be a lot simpler to implement. So I'm really excited to see what people will do with this.
Right on. Well, the stage is yours. Thanks, Daniel.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I want to talk about input components, but I guess a little bit of background. My name's Daniel. I'm a solutions engineer here at Sanity. So my role is often working with our enterprise clients and community clients to figure out how to get the best out of our platform. And been having a lot of fun playing around with version 3 as it's been going through the dev preview. And one of the things I found early on was a set of new features around basically wrapping up components and kind of enhancing the existing components that you might have, the ones that come with the studio, and really giving you a lot of composable options. And I want to talk about real quick why composability is important here. So if we think about a content model for pets, and we have input components, we have an input component for a name and for a breed and for a slogan. And maybe we start out with these as kind of just strings, right? And that's pretty straightforward, and we'll look at what the schema for that looks like. But then maybe you want to have a custom input component for the breed. Maybe you want to look it up against like an external API or something like that. So you can do that, and we've seen custom input components in version 2, and we've seen them in version 3 as well. There's some great resources out there on how to build custom components, and of course that's a lot easier. And now you just you assign the custom input component to your field here in your content model, and you say, okay, yeah, the breed is going to use this different input component. But what if you need to do something to all 3 of these? What if you want to say add a character count to all of them? If you don't have composability, you have to basically replace the functionality for the default strings, and then you also have to add that functionality into your custom component. So you're really remaking 2 different components there. So what if you could, instead of replacing those, just enhance them? What if you could wrap those input components with additional functionality that does things like adding character counts or having additional buttons to insert special characters, things like that? That's exactly what this ability in the new Studio version 3 gives you. So really excited to jump into some code here. So on the left-hand side, you can see I've built out this pet schema, and it's a fairly basic schema. We have here, some basic fields. We have the strings. I've given myself an options list. The only dogs I know about are Chihuahuas, so that's all the options we have here. And we have a few different fields, but they're all, there's strings, there's text, there's a portable text field here for the biography. And we see a fairly standard form built out from that on the right-hand side, right? So if you've been using Sanity for a while, fairly straightforward, fairly standard sort of things here. Now, if we want to add in a custom input, we can do that. And here now we know a lot more breeds because I've written a custom input and I've said, okay, instead of having this default text string input, I have my pet breed input here, and I have that as a little component, and it's basically just pulling in content from from an API. So there's a nice dog.ceo API, gives you a list of breeds. I'm just pulling that in and giving myself a nice little dropdown. Really simple and straightforward to implement here with version 3. But if we get into the meat of that, now I have a custom component here for my dropdown, and I have standard components here for my name and my slogan. If I want to add in a character count on all of these, either I would have to write custom components that have just a string input for the name, and then I add some more logic onto my dropdown, and same for the slogan. But we actually have some ability to actually wrap those. So I'm going to go into 2 basic concepts and talk about 2 things here. First is kind of looking at plugins. And the second one is looking at how these wrappers work. So a plugin in version 3 is basically just a set of configuration. So a set of configuration in this case for my plugin is just going to be the name of the plugin and then some special logic that we'll get into about rendering the form. And so I define this using the create plugin function, and then I'm just going to add that into my Sanity config up at the top level. So a default configuration here will look like desk tool, and here I'm adding in my text stats plugin. So again, a plugin in version 3 is just a subset of a configuration, which makes it really possible to compose things together and build out your own plugins that you can reuse between projects. You can just isolate functionality, and this is a key part of making a composable content editing experience. So in this plugin, we are only doing one thing, and we're providing what's called a render input function. And this render input function is really the key here, because what it is doing is every time the studio is rendering a field, it's going to call this function. And this function is going to tell the studio what to render. And by default, this is handled internally to the studio. But if you want to provide your own function here, you can do so. And so this function will look something like this. So down at the bottom, I have the function, the render text stats. I'm getting props, which tells us some of the information about the component and about the field itself. And then the next function. And the next function is really special because what's going to happen there is whenever I call that, that's just going to wrap call and render whatever functionality would happen there by default otherwise. So this is where we are able to start wrapping existing components. Again, the studio is calling for every component in every field that we show. It's going to call this render text stats function, and then we're going to wrap our field in our input with our own custom component here. So this text stats component then is just a React component. I'm just passing it some information, the ID of the field and the children, which in this case will just be the next, will be the further components that are going to be rendered. And what I'm doing here is I'm just highlighting, that there's a wrapper and showing you where the wrapper is around the input component, and the ID showing you the name of the field. And you'll notice there's a special one here, root. So you can actually wrap the entire form here if you want. So you can wrap the entire form. You can wrap a single field. If we were showing objects, you'd be able to wrap the individual items within objects. Any input field from the root on down will get wrapped. So it can be really powerful. So moving on from there, what if we, all we want to do is wrap the text component. So we don't need that root component wrapped. We don't need to wrap things that aren't text components. So the thing that we do then in our render logic here is say, okay, in our render text stats function, we're going to say if the schema type is text or string, so if it's a text field or a string field, then we're going to wrap it, and we're going to return our text stats component wrapped around the default input component. But if it's not that, then we're just going to call next, and the studio will go on its merry way and just continue rendering out the input components. So that's the main change there, right? We've started narrowing down within our plugin what we're going to apply to. So now you could take this plugin and apply it in any studio, and it would just wrap all the string and text inputs, right? Moving through to the next step, what if we want to do something maybe a little bit useful? So, I had those boxes on it just to kind of give you an idea of what parts are being replaced and where the wrapper is. But, this is a really simple example. What we're doing here is just getting the length of the value of that field and putting it out into a text component beneath the actual input component. So now I have a very useful component that is wrapping things, and I don't have to touch the default text editor. I don't have to touch my custom component. I don't have to touch the other text editor. I don't have to have a different version for the text input versus the string input versus my custom input. It's all the same thing. It's completely composable, so I can add this to anything that is a string value, right? So this makes it really possible. What if I want to have a plugin that does word counts instead of character counts? What if I want to have other plugins that do different things on my string fields? I don't have to kind of have a mega component that does all the things. I can have very specific components that do these things, and then they can compose together to give me the experience that I want. So one further extension here is, what if I don't want this to be on every string, right? My plugin there is just, you say, as soon as I get my plugin, it's going to apply itself to all the strings and all the text boxes. What if I don't want that? Well, one neat thing is when you add in some options here, so every field can have options, you can start to add your own custom options here. And this is giving me the red squiggles because I haven't updated the TypeScript definitions, but you can do that. And I'm basically adding a character count true option here. So now I can opt in. So I can provide a plugin that will wrap any string or text field, and I can opt into it in my schema so that I show it only in the places where I want it. So I don't care about it in the name, right? Like the name's the name. It's going to be short. It's going to be long, whatever. The slogan, maybe I care about. And the breed, I want to know if I have a really long breed here. So we have some ability to provide some options here. And if I look at my component over on the other side, the logic that I've added here is, in addition to selecting whether it's the a text or string field, I'm also seeing if the character count property is in the options for that schema type. So again, this props object that's coming through is giving me all the information about the field that is being rendered. So I can respond to options. I can respond to different things that are configured on the field, and conditionally return my wrapper or not. So it gives you a lot of power there. Now, finally, what if we want to handle this portable text field too? So at the bottom, you probably saw that I have this biography, which is just a standard portable text field. This gets a little bit more complicated, but it's not a ton more complicated, and it's a lot easier to add it, as logic here to a component that's about character count than it is to have, say, a portable text character count component versus a string character count component, or to add it on as a custom component in each of these spots, right? The functionality of this plugin is about character counts, so let's make it work in all the places that it makes sense to have it. So now I'm doing two things. One is I've broken out into a couple little functions, some logic to determine, is it a string or text field, or is it a portable text field? And then based on that, if it's either of those and the character count is enabled, then I do some further logic to get the text value, right? If it is a portable text field, So if it is portable text, then I'm going to use another helper function to just strip out the plain text out of that portable text field. Otherwise, I'm just going to use the raw value of the string. And then I'm going to pass that value into my wrapper component. So again, I can do all this outside of the portable text component, outside the input component. And the actual rendering of this, the React component here hasn't changed at all. I've just changed a little bit of the logic of how I'm selecting to show it and how I'm getting the values to show it. And so the helper functions look a little bit like this. And this is on the GitHub repo. I'll post in the chat here in a second so you can get more into the details of what this looks like. But it's really, for the functionality and the complexity and the optionality that this gives you, really quite straightforward. So yeah, that is kind of one of the neatest things that I've seen in this V3 world, and that's kind of hard to say because there's a lot of neat things. But I think the idea that you can really really compose these different things together in a meaningful and useful way, that you don't have to put everything into a mega component or to pull things together into separate components like that, I think is really, really, really powerful. So this is, one of my favorite things. So excited to see what's in the questions. What do we got?
Yeah, great demo. Thank you so much for showing that. I have a question. Is this even possible in V2, or would it be almost impossible
There are
in V2?
some ways that I've seen it done. Let's put it that way. There are ways that you could do it. There are ways. There's definitely, like in version 2, part of the way that the studio works, there is a component that's there that can basically render the rest of the components. It's not as streamlined, it's not as obvious, and it's not quite as composable as this. So this makes building things as plugins a lot simpler. You would still have to use a custom component in each spot that you want to use it, versus this just being something where you can add an option. So yeah, it's some of those things are possible, but not nearly to the same extent.
I see.
Yeah, we got a comment in the Meetup channel here. Not possible in less than 50 lines of code, which
that is definitely true.
lines up neatly with my question, because I have tried to write some custom input components in V2, and there was a lot of more code in those. How come these code examples are so short? You're even using TypeScript, which is supposed to be,
Yeah, well, how are they so short? It's because in the way that the API is set up for wrapping, right? I'm only needing to pay attention to the specific things that I need to pay attention to, right? And this is even true for when you're writing a custom component itself. It's not wrapping other components, but when you're writing the core custom input, that's also shorter now, because a lot of those things like presence and history and things like that are all abstracted away for you now. In a much cleaner way. But these are so short because literally all I have to do is focus on the functionality that I care about, which is showing a little number at the bottom of a field, right? And that's all. I don't have to care about what's in the middle, right? So it becomes really, really powerful.
That's awesome. I'm super excited for this part of V3 for sure. Thank you so much, Daniel. There's a lot of cheering in the Slack. So.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm going to post the repo right now, so you can all dig in at things that might have flown through and really see how this all works.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
And
thanks, Daniel.
Remember, you can find Daniel and Holm and the rest of the Sanity team in our Slack community at slack.sanity.io. And I put something over my notes. There we go. That's about it. We want to thank everyone for showing up. Next month's meetup will be announced very soon. Keep an eye out on Twitter and in your inbox. We'll also post some links to our Twitter and to the meetup page for these meetups. Hope to see you there again.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. A lot of good info, a lot of great talks. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to my co-host, Martin. And yeah,
you.
we're also hiring at Sanity. So if you're looking for something, or if you know someone who's looking for something, we will post a link to our open positions. I know a lot just got posted recently. Like, I think 3 or 4 are new within the past week. So definitely check that out.
Keep track anymore.
Yeah, there's so many. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We'll see you in the Slack community. We'll see you on Twitter, wherever you are. Thank you so much. And hopefully we see you all next month. See you, everyone.